Well, I'm happy to be here with you this morning. I know what a challenge it is to be in Auroville and to get around and to make things work. I keep learning new lessons about that every day. It's been a great lesson in patience for me. But to pick up on some of Marty's introduction, I've been working at this money problem, as I call it, for almost 30 years now. And the way I got into it was, in the mid-'70s, I started working with the Peace and Justice Center in Rochester, New York, where I lived at that time. And somebody sent us a book. It wasn't a very well-written book, but it was called In the Wake of Inflation, Can the Church Remain Silent? And it was written by an old man who was a very devout Christian and was concerned about the usury factor that is built into our monetary system. So I read his book, and at first it seemed kind of off the wall to me. You know, I had been teaching in the College of Business for 14 years, and I knew something about economics and finance, but I quickly learned that I didn't know anything about money, despite my degrees and my teaching experience. There was enough in that book to set me on a course of research, independent research, to try to get to the bottom of this money problem. And one thing led to another, and I just gradually focused more and more of my attention and energy into solving the money problem. Well, the first part of it was to try to understand it, and that took a number of years for me to satisfy myself that I knew what was going on. And that resulted in the first book that I wrote called Money and Debt, A Solution to the Global Crisis. And that was in 1989, and then I put it together in the second edition in 1990. That book outlines the dimensions of the problem, but it also outlines some basic framework for solving the problem. As the subtitle says, a solution to the global crisis. But that solution, over the subsequent years, has been elaborated. I continued my research to look at what exchange alternatives existed, what we could do to circumvent this political money system. And that resulted in the second book in 1994, New Money for Healthy Communities, which focused on a localization process and using local currency alternatives to mediate exchange instead of using conventional political money. Then I continued to write about these things, and in 2001, Chelsea Green agreed to publish my third book, Money, Understanding and Creating Alternatives to Legal Tender. It's basically an expansion, elaboration, and improvement on New Money for Healthy Communities. And it was sort of an interim step in the process of writing my fourth book, which still hasn't come out yet. I've been too busy traveling and speaking and maintaining my website and my blogs. And hopefully we'll have a handout for you with all of that contact information later on today. So, why is money so important? First, let me distinguish between money and wealth. When people talk about money, they often mean wealth, not money. Wealth is the material things that you own or have claim to. Most of it is not money. You might have a portfolio of stocks and bonds and real estate and CDs and bank accounts. Those are not money. Those are financial assets, financial resources. Money is a medium of exchange, pure and simple. Now, you probably learned in your Economics 101 that money is three things: a medium of exchange, a store of value, and a measure of value. But as I argue in that first book, the Blue Book, these are contradictory functions. When money was pure metal, gold or silver, yes, it could serve all three functions. But money is no longer metal. Money is nothing but credit. And if you don't learn anything else today, you should learn that money is credit. What's money? Credit. Right. Money is credit. So the question is, How do we allocate credit? Who controls credit? How is it managed? And that's what it really comes down to. And the reason why money, as a medium of exchange, is so important is because every economic transaction is mediated through the use of money. When you go down the street to buy something in a shop, you get the things you want, the article of clothing, the book, the food, whatever it is, and what do you give in return? You give money. So money, well, it's still money, because most of the money exists in your bank account. The plastic only accesses your bank account. And if it's a debit card, it simply transfers a number, an amount, from your account to somebody else's account. If it's a credit card, you have 30 days to do that same process. You have to make another step to pay what you have incurred. But this is another point that people fail to grasp, is that most of the money exists in banks. It's not the paper that you carry in your pocket. That's a very small portion of the money supply. Most of the money is numbers in your checking account. And so it's just a record of the amount of credit that you happen to have at some bank in which you hold your account. So visualize for a minute a mountain pass. In strategic terms, historically, those that control the mountain passes are able to control movements in and out of valleys. I remember in the days of my youth, Western movies were very popular. And one of the things that you always heard them say when they were forming a posse trying to get at the outlaws was, "Let's cut them off at the pass." So the posse knew the shortcut to get to the strategic point where they could control the movement. Well, it's the same way with money. Some very smart people a long time ago figured out that if they can control money, they can control everything. Economics, politics, social structures. In fact, the patriarch of the Rothschild dynasty, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, said once, "Give me the power to create a nation's money, and I care not who makes the laws." You know, we see how money rules politics because it can buy votes. We've concentrated power in the hands of legislators, senators, ministers, congresspeople, and those who have the money to patronize them get their will. But it's not just a matter of having the money, it's a matter of being able to create the money. So those who create the money, imagine somebody high up on a hill, and there's a water spring that emerges out of that hillside. Imagine that you control that spring. Now the water gushes down the hill, and eventually it forms a river. People downstream, all they see is the river. They don't see where that water comes from. And it's the same way with money. We don't see where money comes from. But one of the things I discovered, and I discovered this by reading Federal Reserve publications, and they were very upfront about it, is money gets created in banks. And how does money get created in banks? It gets created by the process of banks making loans. So you go to the bank and you say, "I want a loan so I can start a business. I want to open up a bakery. I need to buy ovens, I need to buy equipment, I need to hire employees, and I need to renovate the storefront, and it'll take some months before I start generating some income from this." So the bank will evaluate your plan and your creditworthiness, and they'll probably ask you to put up your house and your children as collateral, and then they'll say, "Okay, we'll give you this loan. Let's say it's 1,000,000 rupees, okay? We'll give you this loan of 1,000,000 rupees, and that's going to cost you interest of 12% a year, and you're going to have to pay back 5,000 rupees every month for the next how many years?" So you get the money, you start your business, and you begin to generate some income by selling your baked goods. Now the bank, in the process of giving you this loan, has created new money. Now there's a lot of obfuscatory rhetoric that economists and bankers engage in that masks this whole process and makes it seem very complicated. Because they talk about reserves and they talk about central banks and all this blah, blah, blah. But the fact is that money gets created when a bank makes a loan. And that's right in the Federal Reserve's own publications, and you can read it on my website. That particular volume is now out of print, but we have copies on the web.
You understand that the money is created only by the interest?
No.
Or by the loan itself?
No, the loan itself.
But that does not get distracted by the reserve of the bank itself?
Well, reserve, in the old days, reserves meant gold. When money was redeemable for gold, then banks had to have a certain amount of gold on reserve. Because people would come in and say, this note says I can redeem it for gold. Give me the gold, I'll give you the note. Most people didn't do that, they just circulated the notes. But occasionally people would come to the bank and say, okay, here's your note, give me gold. So the banks had to have enough gold on hand in order to redeem the paper. And each bank in those days issued its own banknotes, and they were responsible for redeeming those banknotes. It wasn't a centralized system like it is now, where all the banks are linked together under the central bank, and they move reserves as they need to. But reserves are no longer gold. So what do reserves mean today? Reserves simply mean the money creation power that's allocated to each bank in the banking cartel. And that's what banking is. Banking is a cartel. It's very difficult to get into this club. If you wanted to start a bank, there's a lot of rigmarole that you would have to go through in order to get approval to start a bank. So reserves simply mean your bank's power to create money. But the banks collectively create the money by making loans. So don't worry about reserves. Reserves are pretty much meaningless at this point as far as we are concerned.
Are there any countries that are still on gold reserves?
No.
The University Press?
No. Gold has been demonetized. The last step was taken in 1971 when President Nixon closed the gold window, as they say, and he said gold would no longer be given for U.S. dollars. But gold hadn't been used. Currency hadn't been redeemable for gold for a long time before that. What you had was a gold exchange standard. Only nations could claim gold from other nations. But that final step was closed in 1971. So there's still a lot of gold held by central banks and governments, but it has nothing to do with the money supply, or it has no relation to money at this point. So those are the basics. I usually explain all of this stuff in a more deliberate fashion using PowerPoint presentation, and I will start that up and we can go through it in a more leisurely fashion, and we can try to cover the questions that I know you have looming in your mind. So I titled this slideshow, Community and Economy, a Rational Approach to Sustainability, Harmony, and Prosperity. And basically what I want to cover is, first of all, the problem of political money. We've already spoken a little bit about that. I'll elaborate some more. We'll look at some foundation concepts and principles. I'll talk about the importance of local community development, the role that money and exchange play in that process, and we'll look at some historical and current monetary innovations and elaborate a little bit on how to develop healthy regional economies. We are, by the way, embarked on a project of regional economic development here in the Auroville region. Olivier and several others in Auroville have been at this for a while, and over the last few weeks we've been working on a project which Olivier will talk about this afternoon. There is in Auroville now an exchange, a cashless exchange system that's on the web that Olivier will describe this afternoon. This is the first step in a regional economic development process that will include Pondicherry and the whole region within several kilometers of Auroville. And we'll explain the mutual credit clearing process, because this is the essential process that we use. So my website is called reinventingmoney.com, and people, first thing they ask is, why does money need to be reinvented? Well, first of all, throughout the world, money has become an instrument of political power. Money and banking are manipulated for and by limited private interests. As I said, whoever controls money controls everything else. And this political money system is exploitative, dysfunctional, and undemocratic. Now let me say a few words about how that is so. Go back to the days when money was convertible into gold or silver. You could take your banknote to the bank and say, okay, this banknote is a credit instrument of your bank. It says it's redeemable for gold or silver. Here's your note, give me the gold. Now, eventually, governments centralized banking to a large extent, and the government would stand behind the unified currency. At some point, it becomes inconvenient for governments to redeem the paper or the credit money for the gold. So they say, well, we'll make this paper legal tender, and you must accept the paper just as if it were gold. Well, this is a monumental fraud, but politicians have been able to get away with it. So we have built into the conventional money system two parasitic elements: interest and inflation. The banks get to impose interest on all the money that they lend into existence, and the government causes inflation because they have prior access to credit. And the banks will monetize as much government credit as they need to. So political money is inefficient and inequitable. Many needs go unmet because the supply of money is deficient. There seems to be a paradox here, because inflation, which is persistent, is often said to be too much money chasing too few goods. And that is in fact true. So how can we say that the money supply is deficient? Well, I'll get to it in a minute, and if I don't, you remind me. So these periodic cycles of depression and inflation, they come from the actions of central banks. Now, central banks, rather than stabilizing the economy, they destabilize the economy.
Why would they do that?
Well, because they keep trying to manipulate the allocation of money to give money to favored clients. So legitimate businesses starve for credit, while the government gets all the money it wants to fight wars in Iraq or wherever. You see? How can the U.S. government fight a war in Iraq and a war in Afghanistan and run budget deficits of $400 billion a year, year after year, without regard to tax revenues? They can spend as much as they want on destructive activities like that. It's because they have prior access to credit through the monetary system. When the central bank says it will provide as much liquidity as needed, what they're saying is, we will monetize as much government debt as the government wants to spend. So who decides whose interests will be favored? Well, it's the top-level bankers that make the decisions about how to allocate credit. And what is money? Money is credit. So conventional money, political money, causes social and international conflict and ecological destruction. I have a whole slideshow on that. Okay, this is one basic bit of information that you need to understand. When people interact with one another on an economic basis, what are the possibilities? When there's an exchange or a transfer of material value between you and me, it can be a gift where you give me something without any expectation of return. It could be an involuntary transfer where you tell me your money or your life. Or if I'm the government, I can say, give me your money as a tax. Or we put you in jail. Or the third possibility is it can be a reciprocal exchange. Quid pro quo. Value for value. So when people engage in a reciprocal exchange, each is satisfied that they have gotten the better of the deal. And this is the realm in which money plays its role. Money does not play the role in charity unless it's a gift that you're giving to someone. The purpose of money is to mediate reciprocal exchange so that people get as much as they give as much as they get in this game we call the economy. So it's credit, really, that makes the world go round, at least in this material plane. Money is credit, and credit is the lifeblood of business. And last year we had here in Auroville a conference called Knowledge, Business, and Consciousness. And that title by itself recognizes the fact that business is an essential portion of human activity. All of our material needs get taken care of through business. It's very little that we produce for our own consumption or within our own household for our own use. Most of what we need we get by trade. That's why money is so important. So we have two distinct credit functions. We have the exchange function, and it's short-term credit that we use for the exchange function. You don't use long-term credit for the exchange function. It's also been called turnover credit, or in business terms, working capital. Those of you who know anything about accounting, in accounting you have current assets, what is called current assets. Those are the short-term assets, the things that are either cash already in your pocket or that can be readily turned into cash in a short order. That would be your accounts receivable, what people owe you, and your inventories, the goods that you're going to sell very soon. The other kind of credit serves the finance function. That's long-term investment and savings. So we have these two different classes of credit. And what distinguishes one from the other is the time factor. Credit that we use for exchange is short-term. Credit that we use for finance is long-term. One principle of money and banking that has been pretty much forgotten is that money should be created on the basis of short-term credit. It should be short-term credit. It should be created on the basis of goods or services in the market already or soon to arrive in the market. If you want to finance long-term investments, then you use money that's already in existence. And you find people who have surplus temporarily to allocate their temporary surplus so that you can start your business. So savings and investment are two sides of the same coin. When I want to save, I have to find somebody to allocate my surplus money to on a temporary basis. And in return, maybe I get a note from them that says they owe me money. Maybe I get a share of their business, which says I have a certain proportion of the profits coming to me. Maybe it's some other sort of long-term financial claim. Well, let's look at communities now. Yes. In finance, there are two basic kinds of finance, debt and equity. If you want to get money to start a business, you can either borrow it, which means you have a debt, or you can give a share of your enterprise, that's equity, shared ownership. In conventional financial instruments, a bond for example, of General Motors would be debt that General Motors owes to you, the bondholder. It has a fixed amount that they must pay to you, and it has a fixed rate of interest that they also must pay to you. So it doesn't matter whether General Motors' business is good or bad, they still have to pay that amount. On the other hand, if you own a share of General Motors stock, you are a part owner in the company. And what you have is a claim against the assets and the profits of the business. So you share the risks and the rewards with the other owners. Whereas if you hold a bond, you don't take that risk. Your risk is limited. There is some risk, of course, that the company will bankrupt and will not be able to pay the loan or the bond, but that's a much smaller risk than if you own a share of stock. Because it's a set of priorities. The creditors, the bondholders have priority over the stockholders in case of liquidation of the company. Okay, looking at it on the community level, we have a number of things that are going on these days. We have mutual assistance programs, like various kinds of service credits. Time banks have become quite...
What's a service credit?
You do something for somebody and you get a credit for it. It's sort of... time dollars are an example of service credits. Time dollars were started by Edgar Kahn, who was a Washington lawyer with a social conscience, and he wanted to find a way to help communities to get more volunteer services. So he thought, well, if we reward volunteers by recognizing them with time dollars or something that just provides a record that they have done something good for someone in the community, then they can later claim something service from others in the community. So there are time banks in the UK now and other parts of the world. This is mostly a social networking tool, and it helps extend the volunteer sector by at least acknowledging that the voluntary effort has been put forth.
So you can say that the energy replaces the money factor, you know?
Yeah, it's not really a money system, it's not a reciprocal exchange, it's more of a gift kind of thing.
But it's not in the sense that they can actually reclaim it later.
Yes, but there's no binding contract. There's an expectation, there's a record of the service, and hopefully others will be there in the future to service you when you need the service. It started mainly as service to elderly people and extended somewhat to tutoring for young people and such as that.
But then there's it's like Access or like a LESS program where...
No.
How's it sort of, how do you know who's got how much credit?
Well, there is a ledger with the information, but the nature of the agreement is somewhat different. So let me explain the reciprocal exchange. We have, aside from national currencies now, we've had springing up mutual credit clearing systems and community currencies. And some of these examples may be familiar to you. There are hundreds of local currencies that have sprung up around the world over the last 25 years. And there are many LETS systems. LETS is a type of mutual credit clearing system. And I'll explain more about that later on. Well, if we're going to talk about community economics, we have to understand what a community is. And we use the term very loosely, and it has multiple meanings. But according to Michael Linton, and I like this definition, an effective community is a process. It's an ongoing collection of interactions and continuing relationships. It's not a one-off thing. It's not something that happens between strangers who never see each other again. But community membership can be defined in a number of different ways. It can be based on geographical proximity, or common culture, common religion, shared interests, shared ideologies, whatever. So we'll come back to that. Let's go back first to the evolution of money. I said earlier that money started out as commodities. Gold and silver are commonly the ones that we think of when we think of commodity money. But other commodities have served in the past as money. In the American colonies before the Revolution, tobacco was frequently used as a medium of exchange. Hides, nails, furs, animal skins. Then as the process evolved, we evolved to symbolic money. We had paper money that was redeemable for commodities. These were essentially warehouse receipts. You would go to a goldsmith, you would give him your gold for safekeeping. He would issue you notes in certain denominations that were redeemable for gold. They were essentially a receipt saying there was so much gold on deposit, and this was a receipt. You could claim the gold anytime you wanted. And if you wanted to transact business with someone, you would give them this note, and then they could claim the gold from the goldsmith. Then credit money was invented. The early banks were goldsmiths, and they realized that people seldom came to claim their gold. So they thought, maybe we can issue our notes for more than the gold we have, and we can lend out the notes at interest. This is what became known as fractional reserve banking. So you had two kinds of money in circulation. You had symbolic money and credit money, both paper notes, and both redeemable for gold. Now, does that mean that all the credit money was fraudulent? Not necessarily, because the credit money was typically backed up by collateral. When the banker loaned out these extra notes, it would lend them out on the basis of collateral that you would pledge against your loan. Maybe it was a house, maybe it was a farm, maybe it was machinery. So the credit money was backed up by real value, but it wasn't gold on deposit. On the other hand, sometimes credit money was issued on the basis of fraudulent collateral. I'm the banker. My brother-in-law wants a loan. He doesn't have any collateral. So I let him sign a note saying he does have some collateral, but there is no value behind it. Or maybe I overvalue the collateral that he has pledged. Let's say it's his horse and buggy. I give him a loan of $300, and the horse and buggy is really only worth $100. So that came to be known as flying a kite, when money was created on the basis of insufficient collateral. So we had all kinds of abuses that came into play when credit money was invented. That doesn't mean that credit money is not valid money. It just means it needs to be properly issued. Now let's look at the sources of credit. Obvious sources are banks when they make loans. But that's not the only source of credit. If you're in business, your customers can be a source of credit. How many people have ever bought a gift certificate or a gift card from a merchant? It's quite common practice in the United States and elsewhere, I think, the developed world at least. You go to Barnes & Noble or Borders and you buy a gift card. You know, I need to give a gift to my granddaughter. I don't know what book she wants. I'll just buy a gift card and send her the gift card. Then she can take that to Barnes & Noble and get the books that she wants and pay for it with the gift card. What this amounts to, it's a prepayment of merchandise that will be delivered later on. This has gotten to be big business in the United States, and merchants are getting a lot of credit from their customers in this way.
And of course, that money is deposited in the bank where there's an interest
Yes.
on it
Right.
before you actually, the person actually pays.
Right. And businesses are also getting credit from their suppliers and employees. If the employee does work, typically he doesn't get paid until a week or two have elapsed, maybe even a month. So The employer is getting the loan, getting the value of all that labor, and doesn't have to pay for it for a month. Likewise, typically businesses deal with each other on open accounts. What?
That's what I was hearing all the time.
It's a Santa Claus cat. Okay, give him a little coax there. Seems to be happy there. So when a business sells on open account, it actually delivers value, and the buyer doesn't have to pay for some period of time, 30 days or 90 days, whatever is customary in that line of business. And then there's direct credit clearing, which I'll talk about more later on. So the problem with civilization throughout has been that the commons have been privatized. And there are many aspects to the commons. The most familiar example is the Enclosure Acts in England several hundred years ago. Prior to that time, there were common lands where villagers grazed their sheep and harvested wild plants and forage for food and whatnot. And everybody had access. They cut firewood. They had a way of managing the commons among themselves so that nobody hogged the produce of the commons. And then the aristocracy managed to convince the king that they should enclose the commons and allocate those lands to the aristocrats. And then everybody else had to pay tribute to the lords in order to gain access to the commons. That might be in the form of crop shares or money. And so what was common property before became private. Now we've seen an increasing trend in this direction of privatizing the commons. The Washington Consensus, as it's so called, has been pushed on the rest of the world. Governments, particularly in the third world, have been forced by the IMF to privatize, that is, to sell off government-owned assets. And Argentina is a prime example of the disastrous consequences of doing that. Anyway, I want to focus on the credit commons because people don't ever think of credit as being a commons. The money that we use is backed up by our collective credit. It's our labor and it's our resources and talents that back up the money, because it's our willingness to accept that money as payment that gives it any value at all. And this is the way we have to access the credit commons now. Even though we all provide input to the credit commons, none of us can take out of the credit commons except by going to a bank and getting a loan. Now, we don't all take loans because some of us earn money from employers who have taken loans or from governments that have taken loans. But the point is, nobody has access to the commons, the credit commons, without going through a bank. That's the wellspring. That's the point of origin for money. But we're going to look at alternatives that bypass the banking system and conventional money completely. So our focus needs to be on rebuilding our local economies. And Jane Jacobs, a well-respected economist who just recently died, she was well into her 90s, she wrote a book called Cities and the Wealth of Nations, and several other books in addition. She said that cities, not nations, are the salient economic entities. This is where the economic pot boils, is within cities and city regions. And nations are really an artificial political collectivization of cities. So it's the economies of cities and their economic regions that we have to focus on when we talk about the health of the national and global economies. And it's neighborhoods and villages that provide the social context for our local economies. And she focused in on this process of import substitution as the essential process by which local economies develop and grow. As an economy develops, something that it formerly imported, it will now produce locally for local consumption. Now, imports and exports will continue. No city is ever completely self-reliant. There's always some interaction with the outside world, but it will occur on a more favorable level. The most unfavorable position to be in is that of a basic commodity exporter. And this is the dilemma of many third world countries. All they have to export is produce of mines, produce of forests, produce of rangeland. They don't add much value. So it's the outside buyers who can dictate the terms of trade. But as you become more self-reliant and add more value to the product, then you become more independent. So common problems that local economies have. Local producers are forced to compete with outside producers, and they are often subsidized, they enjoy political privilege, or they don't have to play by the same rules of the game. Many examples we can think about. The United States heavily subsidizes its agricultural sector. It's a big part of the World Trade Organization, but because it exports so much food to the rest of the world, it routinely destroys indigenous agriculture in third world countries. The United States has exported most of its manufacturing to China and other Asian countries. It first started by exporting those jobs to Mexico and the Caribbean. So the manufacturing capacity of the United States has been greatly diminished because companies have been going to low-wage countries and countries where environmental regulations don't exist or are not enforced. So the terms of trade are often dictated by outside buyers and sellers who dominate the markets. And the resources and wealth get siphoned off by absentee owners, as they did in Argentina during the 1990s. Conventional money, as I said, is scarce, and it quickly comes in and quickly goes out again. So here's a pictorial representation of that. This green oval is the local community. You have local businesses. They manage to earn some money from outside, spend it once or twice, and it goes back out for imports. So what are the foundations of local economic health? Healthy community economies require a large measure of independence, self-determination, freedom to experiment, and local self-reliance. The more we can enhance those, the more healthy the local economy will be. And one important way to enhance those is to have your own credit clearing or complementary currency system. So the ongoing debate that economists have with one another is free trade versus protectionism. And they're always harassing the politicians with one side of that argument or the other. And it's a vain argument because you need both free trade and protection. The foundation of any economy is its workers and entrepreneurs. It makes sense to protect them. And our quality of life in our community is determined by more than the amount of stuff that we consume. It's having some say over what happens in our community. A good analogy is the small boat harbor. This process of globalization has been systematically tearing down the seawalls that protect the small businesses in local communities. I say the tidal wave of globalization smashes all but the biggest companies. So we need to create safe harbors. What kinds of seawalls can we build in our local economies? To reduce exploitation, to enhance local economic vitality, to enable self-determination, and to optimize our community's standard of living and quality of life. Money is the key. Specialization of labor means that we must acquire most of what we need by trading with others. It's the Khyber Pass, if you will. A centralized money system, however, is suboptimal, as we've already pointed out. Conventional money is scarce, it's misallocated, and it's expensive. What can we do about it? We need exchange mechanisms that enable all desirable trades, that enable the need to be connected with the supply, and not limited because there's not enough money. We need to reduce business costs by eliminating the interest burden. We need to favor local suppliers over external suppliers. And we need to enable the community to have control over its own economy. And we do this by liberating the exchange process. Mutual credit clearing exchanges and complementary currencies. So the questions that we're going to get into next are, what is a mutual credit clearing exchange? How does credit clearing work? What are complementary currencies? How do you create them? Are these approaches practical? Is there any precedent? And are there any good models that we can emulate in creating them? So obviously the answers to those questions are yes. And the advantageous outcomes that we can expect are these. By using these mechanisms, we will utilize the credit of our own local producers, produce our own exchange medium that will circulate within the local area, that will supplement the supply of scarce official money, that will enable more trading to take place at a lower cost, that will reduce unemployment because now we have enough medium of exchange to employ more of the people that want to be employed. These exchange media will enable local businesses to better compete with the large corporate chains. And the community currency credits will remain in the community because they are issued by people in the community and have to come back for satisfaction.
You got a question here?
Yes.
We had a system kind of like this in the early American Federation, and it's expanded because private communities could not go trade with each other. You have to go exchange currencies from city to city or state to state. How would commerce between local countries or local regional currencies going to exist if you have an uncommon currency?
That is a big question, and I would like to defer that until later. The main thing is to build sound local systems first, and eventually we can network them together. And then we'll look at what are the requirements for adequately networking these local exchanges together. But to just give you a hint, it's sort of like if you think about the early days of personal computers. Initially, every personal computer was a local system. Now we have the Internet. The Internet is a way of tying the local systems together into a larger system where we can interrelate to one another. So I can send files from my computer to your computer, and it's no problem. At some point, we will get into the mechanisms required to do that.
Is it allowed? Is that a kind of system? The Indian state, he allows?
Let's not worry about that. We'll get into what's allowed and what we can legally do and what we can't do. That's a fuzzy area, but a short answer to the question is, if we have the right to contract, we can do pretty much anything we want, as long as we don't try to counterfeit rupee currency. Okay, so let's look at a system where we have a local medium of exchange. If we have a medium of exchange that originates within the community, we can see that it circulates within the community over and over again. Each of these diamonds represents a local business. Now, the local currency might go outside temporarily, but it has to come back in to be redeemed for goods and services by the business or municipal agency that issued it in the first place. So it's money that comes home. So next we'll look at a brief overview of exchange alternatives, both historical and contemporary. And I'll give you a little bit of my own personal experience, and we'll look at some popular approaches also within the commercial realm. Okay, let me finish out this one slide and then we can take a break. This alternative exchange movement actually has two main currents. There's what I call the grassroots or social action current, which is the LET systems, the community currencies. LET stands for Local Exchange Trading System. LET systems are quite common. There are hundreds of them around the world. But then on the right we have the other current of the movement, which is the commercial business, the for-profit barter exchanges. And barter is a misapplication of the term. Trade exchange is really a more appropriate term, because what they do is they provide credit clearing services to their business clients or members. It's a business-to-business process where businesses can trade with one another without using money. Instead, they use internal credit, which is cleared by the exchange. Here's a pictorial representation of some local currencies. Here's a pictorial representation of some of the commercial enterprises that are involved. I just spent a little more than 2 weeks in China during the month of June. This man on the right was my host, and he arranged several presentations for me to give while I was there. So let's break at this point, and when we come back, I'll talk a little bit about the Argentina experience, their trading clubs and community currencies. So the Argentina case is a very interesting one, because numerous trading clubs emerged during the 1990s. Starting around 91, I think it was, the government of Argentina decided that they were going to follow very closely the recommendations of what's called the Washington Consensus and the IMF, and they went ahead and they started privatizing all the government-owned assets, including 4,000 miles of gas and oil pipeline, which they sold to an Enron subsidiary. And here's the thing, these northern companies, these companies from the developed world, they can get access to financing because they have the banking connections with American and European banks. So they say, sure, we'll create as much money as you need to buy whatever you want to buy. So Argentina was maintaining dollar parity with the peso. And Sergio Lube, my close associate and good friend, he and I have made 2 trips to Argentina, once in 2001, once in 2003. So we went there to check out the social money movement and to participate in a conference that Heloisa Primavera had organized. She's a professor in Buenos Aires. Anyway, these are some shots from the first visit in 2001. And I'll be showing you a video clip in a little while about this. But here are people trading with one another in these large spaces. Hundreds of people come to trade. And they're not using pesos at all. They're using their own currencies, and there were many different kinds in circulation. Here are just a few of them. And this movement was spreading not only from Argentina, but to Brazil and Venezuela, Ecuador, and other countries as well. So in 1991, the Argentine government adopted the policies favorable to foreign banks and investors, and they did the things that I mentioned. These policies caused impoverishment and high rates of unemployment, even amongst the middle-class professionals. So the people decided they had to do something themselves to help themselves, and they started these cheque clubs, or trading clubs. And from 1995 on, these sprung up all over the greater Buenos Aires area, and later on in other parts of the country. These are the 3 guys that started the first one, all professionals. Here's a New York Times article that was written about it in May of 2001, and some of the activity. So now I'll show you the video clip of that first visit. Okay, I think we'll stop it there. That was just to give you some idea of the extent of it and the excitement. So, any questions about that before we go on? Yeah.
How did the people go and okay, I understand the currency, but I understand that maybe just how little things like trading. So the trading was the paper, but how can the people know that this lady needs to pay later for all the things that she's paying?
They're not paying later. They're paying on the spot with their own currency.
And then
So when you join a club, you would get a certain amount of credito notes.
yeah, but then in the real world, and they need to change all this currency into the normal.
No, they don't do that.
They don't do that.
No, that's a separate economy. You got the peso economy, you got the credito economy.
It seems to be working.
Well, after a fashion, we went back there in 2003. By that time, the social money movement had suffered a great setback. And the reason was that, as best we could determine, was that there was a combination of fraud, naivety, malfeasance, some counterfeiting. And when we were there in 2001, there was already some sign that some of the notes were being counterfeited, the notes that were most commonly in circulation. But for some reason, nobody did anything about it.
Counterfeiting is using this communal.
Yeah. So by the end of 2002, the social money movement had pretty much collapsed. Some of the clubs went back to local trading without trying to network and accept each other's currencies. So they're in a rebuilding process. One of the main reasons why the social money movement collapsed is because there was a financial crisis at the end of 2001 in Argentina. You may remember news reports about it. People that had pesos in the bank were not allowed to get their money out of the bank. The banks were limiting people's withdrawal of their own money because the peso could no longer be maintained at par with the dollar. You see, this is what happens when a country gets exploited by the IMF and the northern banks. After they sold off all their assets and these private companies started raising their prices, they were sucking value out of the country as quickly as they could. They would take their peso earnings, convert them to dollars, and then take the dollars back to New York or Houston or wherever it was. So, eventually a country has to run out of dollars. They had nothing more to sell, so the peso fell to about 30 cents relative to the dollar. And that's the way it stands now. But for a long time during that banking crisis, people couldn't get access to the money even if they had it in the bank. And people were literally starving. So what did they do? They jumped on the social money lifeboats. And they came in swarms without proper orientation or the proper initiation process. And so things became very chaotic. And many of these social money issues were not issued correctly to begin with. And the main thing that we have to learn from this experience is that you've got to do these things right. When you issue a currency, you have a fiduciary responsibility. This is a financial instrument. You've got to treat it like a financial instrument, and there has to be an adequate agreement behind it. Another example I want to show you is the WIR, W-I-R. It's a Swiss phenomenon. It's now a conventional bank, but it started as a mutual credit clearing system. And it's important because it was one of the first mutual credit clearing systems to be organized, and it's the one that has been most successful over a long period of time. And credit clearing is the highest step in the evolution of reciprocal exchange. We talked about commodity money, then symbolic money, and then credit money, and now credit clearing. This is the highest stage of evolution in the reciprocal exchange process. And WIR was a good example of the application of that reciprocal exchange through credit clearing. It was started in 1934 as a mutual credit association, and it's continued to thrive. There I am in 2005. Sergio was with me at that time as well. He took this picture. And we met with a Professor Tobias Studer, who had written this book about the history and operations of the Veerbank. One of my associates in California has translated that book into English. So it was started as a solidarity-oriented self-help group for the small and medium-sized businesses in Switzerland. The problem in the Great Depression was not enough conventional money circulating. It was a global depression, and it affected Switzerland as well as the United States and other countries. So within a year they had 3,000 participants, and turnover was $1 million francs, or 10 times the volume. Here's some of the growth figures from 1980 through the mid-90s. You can see that the amount of transactions cleared through the system was doubling every 3 or 4 years. All of a sudden, this growth virtually stopped.
Can you convert to the same money from the country?
No.
If you can't do that, it will be much more difficult.
There's no need to do that. This is going to fuel a separate economy, like you saw in Argentina. There was no pesos changing hands at those trading fairs. And yes, it's a convenience if you can exchange one currency for the other, but it's not necessary. As long as you can spend the currency for something you can use, that's all that's necessary. Now, what's happened with the Veerbank, and the reason for this curtailment in the growth, is not entirely made clear by any of the documentation that I've seen. My suspicion is that there are forces inside and outside the Veerbank that are afraid that this credit clearing process will become more well known. So the Veerbank became a conventional bank in 1996, and they started taking deposits in Swiss francs and offering loans in Swiss francs. And the Swiss franc business now is more than half of the business of the Veerbank. So here are some sources. You can go to lulu.com if you want the English translation of Studer's books. Download it for $3. There's a link from my website, reinventingmoney.com. Why do community currencies sometimes stagnate and fail? We have more than 25 years of experience now with community currencies and LET systems. Why haven't they had a bigger impact? There are a number of reasons for that, and these are some of them. But to give you a little bit more background, the typical pattern is a LET system or a community currency will be started up by a volunteer group, and it will be greeted with some enthusiasm, and people will start to use it, and it will grow for a while, and then it will reach a peak, and then it'll start a slow, long decline. That's the typical pattern. Now, there are a few that manage to thrive over a longer period, but the reasons why the failure to thrive is so prevalent are similar to, if you think of the early days of space flight, before space flight even got started. I happened to work in the aerospace industry in my early career, and I was a rocket test engineer for a while. So I was, sort of knowledgeable about those things. What does it take to put a satellite into orbit around the Earth? The main thing is you have to have a booster rocket powerful enough to reach what is called escape velocity. Otherwise it goes up, it stops, and it comes back down. But if you can reach escape velocity, if you have a rocket powerful enough to do that, then you can put the satellite in a place where it will continue to orbit because it has a balance of of forces with the Earth's gravitation, and it's able to stay up there. Well, it's the same thing with a local exchange system or a community currency. We have to find a way to counterbalance the destructive forces that militate against it. And the reason why we have the pattern that we've observed is, first of all, failure of reciprocity. You remember I said that the purpose of money is to mediate reciprocal exchange. If reciprocity breaks down somewhere in the process, then the currency loses its value.
Can you define reciprocity, please?
Reciprocity is you get as much as you put in, and you put in as much as you take out. If you think of the economy as a game of put and take, and I remember when I was a kid, we had a game called put and take. It was a little top that you spin, and it would say put one or take two or something like that, or take all. And the idea of reciprocity is that you put as much into the common pot, the economy, as you take from it. And money is the way we manage that process. So if money stops being a proper medium for reciprocity, then it becomes valueless or declines in value. So if a currency is improperly issued, if it's issued to too large an extent, or if it's issued on the basis of a lack of a clear agreement between the issuers and the users, it's going to break down. These are system design flaws.
Sorry, I don't understand the first two basis of issues.
Okay, well that gets into the graduate level course.
Well, you've got language problems here too, don't forget.
Yeah.
Kind of doing thing that's junk.
Currency should be issued on the basis of goods already in the market or shortly to arrive in the market, as I said before. If you issue a currency on the basis of, let's say, government debt that doesn't put any value into the market, you're going to cause a debasement of the currency, which shows up as inflation of prices. So that's what I mean by improper basis of issue. This is the banker issuing money to his brother-in-law on the basis of insufficient collateral or improper collateral. And if money is issued in excess of the goods that are going to market, then it's going to cause debasement of the currency as well.
Too much money to
in relation to the goods, yeah. There are other issues like management issues, lack of accountability and transparency. This was a big one in the Argentina case. A lot of the people that were running these trade exchanges and issuing these currencies weren't up front with the information. Nobody could penetrate the veil and find out how much currency had been issued, who got it, how it was put into circulation. And so there was probably a lot of shenanigans going on behind the scenes. Inadequate management procedures and controls. Again, people not being able to track the history of the currency issuance and circulation. And failure to respond to internal or external threats. Like I said, they failed to recognize and act on the counterfeiting that was already going on in 2001. And then you have the issues of scale and scope. And these are probably universal almost with the grassroots currencies. They've never managed to achieve quite the level of participation or to have the sufficient scope of goods and services offered in order to make it a viable alternative. So, for example, if I'm part of a credit clearing system like Tucson Traders, which I helped to start in my hometown, it's inconvenient for me to travel all the way across the city in order to buy my 2 loaves of home-baked whole wheat bread. I want to be able to use my currency in the places where I'm accustomed to shopping. So this means we've got to bring in the mainstream businesses. We can't ask people to change both the way they pay for things, and where they shop at the same time. You got to do one of those things at a time. So what we're trying to do here in Auroville, we're trying to organize a regional exchange that brings in the established businesses in the community, the places that people are accustomed to shopping. The other thing is we have to try to recruit all levels of the supply chain. This is called the supply chain. If you want retailers to be involved in an alternative exchange system, they're going to be wanting to pay their suppliers. And who are their suppliers? They're wholesalers. And if you want the wholesalers to be involved, they're being supplied by manufacturers. So you have to get the manufacturers involved. And if you want the manufacturers involved, you want to recruit their suppliers who provide the basic commodities. The farm foodstuffs, the timber, the minerals, and so on. But you notice that every one of these has employees, and ultimately we want to get the employees involved in the process of accepting the alternative exchange. And of course, they shop at the retail level, so the currency ends up back at the retailers. Whenever we talk about a currency, these are the questions that people need to ask. We need to be able to evaluate whether a currency is properly issued, whether it's valuable or not. So first of all, you have to know who's the issuer. How is it issued into circulation? Is it legitimate or not? That is, what's the basis or the foundation of the currency? How much of it is issued? And how does that amount relate to the foundation? What are the terms of the contract? Because a currency is a financial instrument. It's a credit instrument. There's an implied, at least, if not explicit, contract involved. Now, if you looked at the old banknotes that were issued, they would say, this note issued by the Bank of Podunk is redeemable in gold at the bank at the request of the holder. Now what does the currency say? Anybody have a rupee? No, not here, I don't think. Federal Reserve Notes says that. Federal Reserve Notes says, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. And I already told you what legal tender means. It means if you are owed a debt, you must accept those notes in payment of that debt. Otherwise, you have no recourse to the courts. The courts will not enforce your claim against your debtor if you refuse his Federal Reserve notes. And that's a way of keeping debased currency circulating. But you see, we need to create competition in currency. And there are even some mainstream economists that have written extensively about competition in currency. I went to a conference of the Cato Institute back in 1989 in Washington, D.C. And that was attended by a bunch of economists who were advocating competition in currency. So, we need to know, what does the issuer promise? What is the form of redemption? Usually it's not going to be in another form of money, it's going to be in goods and services that it will be redeemed. And what are the limits on the amount that may be issued? What is the duration of the contract? Is there an expiration date on the currency? Are there any fees, conditions, or limitations associated with redemption? Let me give you an example. Toronto dollars and Berkshires. These are two currencies issued locally, one in Toronto and one in Massachusetts. Toronto dollars have been issued for a number of years. Berkshires just came out this year. They're both sold for cash. You have to have official money in order to get them. So they really represent just a gift certificate. You're converting a general purpose currency into a local currency. Or you're prepaying for merchandise that you will get from the merchants who are willing to accept the Berkshires or the Toronto dollars. And those dollars, those Toronto dollars or Berkshires, can be converted back into the national currency, but at a discount. I think it's 90 cents or 95 cents in the case of Berkshires.
This is also how the Singapore currency works. Initial participants put in over 10,000 pounds of their own money to create 10,000 pounds of their Singapore currency. What is it? The benefit of it.
Good point.
Yeah.
What is the benefit of it? And this is where I get myself into trouble. Because the benefit of that kind of currency is really quite minimal. As I said, you're converting a general purpose currency that you can use anywhere in the country for a limited use currency, like a gift card or a gift certificate that can only be used in the limited local area. Now that does promote buy local, it does promote business with the local community, but only in the same way that a gift certificate does. And if you redeem it back into cash, it's not going to stay local for very long anyway. People are going to, and they typically do, redeem it back into cash very quickly. So it's very limited utility when you issue a currency on the basis of selling it for cash. The real power in a community currency is issuing it on the basis of something you already have. Not money. We want to detach from the conventional money system. You want to issue it on the basis of your own skill, your own goods, your own services. This is the process that's called monetization. That's what bankers mean by monetization. Monetization is the way you take illiquid value tied up in, let's say, the merchandise you have for sale, and convert it into value that can be used as an exchange medium. So when I go to the bank and I say, I've got 1 million rupees worth of goods inventory that's ready for sale, would you give me a loan on the basis of this inventory? If the bank gives me the loan, they have monetized the value of my inventory because now I have money. The value of my inventory has been converted into money, which I can then use to pay my employees, my suppliers, and when that money goes out into circulation, then you have it, other people have it, to buy the goods that I'm putting into the market. This is the way the exchange process needs to work. So, the real power in a community currency is when we issue it on the basis not of conventional money, but on the basis of our own goods and services. Remember what I said before. The reason why community currencies stagnate or fail is because they do not achieve critical size. Most communities are too small, and especially when a community is just starting, you don't have a wide enough range of goods and services to enable it to sustain a currency. So I don't encourage new communities or even old communities like Auroville to start their own currency system without bringing in the wider business community. If you don't get the conventional businesses involved, it's not going to thrive. Olivier this afternoon is going to talk about the access system that has been already set up here. It's basically a LET system, a mutual credit clearing system. And right now it's limited to Aurovillians and some guests and visitors. But in stage 2, we plan to go beyond Auroville into Pondicherry and the surrounding community and to really work hard at recruiting conventional businesses into this clearing system. Because then we will have something substantial that may be able to sustain itself. Yes?
This would be more realistic or more beneficial to the community just to do without any foreign. I know I'm from Senegal and currently the French bank rate is the 19th right on front is the north. Up to the late 70s, we just exchange. For example, the farmer will take his milk to the market, and then get fish and all the other goods in it.
On a barter basis?
Right.
Direct barter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at that time also, we just, we would, the consumer in the local community. I mean, money circulation there in the early 80s. And then now, I mean, we eat right from Thailand, we eat, lots of things from the US or other. So my question is, wouldn't it be possible, commissioners to just start, to come back to, market and
The way I would suggest that you do it, you already have a marketplace. You already have people coming together in the marketplace from time to time with their goods to sell. That's an ideal situation for creating a credit clearing system. The medieval trading fairs used to use a clearing process. This is not something new. People would come from all over once or twice a year to Genoa or wherever, and they would set up to trade with one another. And they didn't pass gold back and forth every time they made a transaction. They kept an account of what they sold to whom and what they bought from whom. And at the end, 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, when they were all done, they settled the residual balances. So you could transact millions of dollars worth of business and only exchange maybe $1,000 worth of gold. Because some people sold more than they bought, they had gold coming. Some people bought more than they sold, they had to put gold in. So this is the way the clearing process works. Now, I want to stop here because we have a simulation game that we're going to play, and it'll probably take the rest of the time to do that. So, we are all now part of a mutual credit clearing exchange. We all have goods and services to offer, and we are going to trade among ourselves and keep a record of what we sold, what we bought, what we paid, and how much we got for the things we sold. So Tewa is going to pass out your account sheet. Okay, here are the instructions. Put your name in the slot where it says member name. Here, I'll take that one.
Any number?
Don't worry about the account number. Okay, all accounts begin with a zero balance, and that's indicated in the right-hand column. Don't worry about the date; it'll all be today. Now, when you make a sale, you are the provider, so you put self in that column. When you make a purchase, you are the recipient, so put self in the recipient column, not now. Then in the description column, write a description of the item that's being bought or sold. And you're going to have to negotiate prices of the things that you buy and sell. I want each person to take 4 of these papers here. Just check them out at random. No, at random. No picking and choosing. So when you make a sale, the amount in the amount column should be a plus. When you make a purchase, the amount for that purchase should be a minus. Okay? Because when you make a sale, your account is going to be credited. It'll go up. When you make a purchase, your account will be debited. It's going to go down. So a sale is a plus, a purchase is a minus. Make sure you put those signs in there. Plus sign or a minus sign? beside the amount, in front of the amount. They're all oro credits. We'll call them oro credits. You're transacting on the basis of oro credits, and one oro credit is equivalent in value to 1 rupee. Okay, everybody got 4? Okay.
When we're selling, we're the providers.
Yes.
We buy, we have to get the right name when we.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Start trading. Try to finish that up in 20 minutes. Okay, this man has a bed for sale. Who wants to buy a bed? No barter. You decide. You decide. Negotiate. On your things. Don't barter. Put a price on it and sell it for oro trade credit.